My name is Cole Stangler. I'm a journalist and writer based in Marseille, France. You're here for the first episode of What Do We Want? Conversations with the International Left. Thanks for joining us. Super excited today to have our first guest for our very first episode, Delia Ramirez, congressional representative from the 3rd District of Illinois, been serving since 2023, one of the leading progressive members of Congress today in the United States. We're going to have a great conversation with Delia Ramirez. Congresswoman, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Oh, glad to be on, Cole. Thanks for having me.
All right, so the first question. This is our first episode. So I think a question I'm going to be asking everyone here on this show to begin is sort of the title of this show, which is what do we want? So the question I'll ask you really is what do you want, Representative Delia Ramirez? What's the sort of vision that you're fighting for in Congress today?
Yeah, I think if you were asking me and I had to just give you one response, it's I'm fighting for people to have a qualified, dignified life and to be able to retire with dignity and not matter their zip code, not matter their race, not matter their region or their background. And how we get there, that's the big question of how we get there and what needs to change for us to get there. But that's what I'm fighting for.
Right. So the sort of dignity of sort of ordinary people, making sure that people have a decent standard of living. Pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. And I mean, basically, I told you the how part to me feels like we can go on and on and on, but really it's how do we center every policy choice, every decision we make in Washington, putting working people at the center of every single decision and making sure that we are not making decisions without their input, but that they're also centered in every decision being made. Right now, what you see in Washington, D.C. is decisions often being made by whatever the lobbyist, whatever the corporation, whatever the donor, the super PAC, the foreign PAC has demanded and prioritized, or whatever that leader particularly wants for their own power and gain. That's not centering working people, and it's why you see that in a country that likes to brag about being one of the richest in the world, we don't have good quality healthcare. We have substandard education in many parts of this country, and you have so many people suffering, trying to figure out how they pay for their rent and also afford basics like groceries or going to a doctor. If we centered working people in every decision we made, that wouldn't be the case.
Right. So I want to get back to that how question, as you said. How do you kind of achieve that? In just a second, we're going to talk about the Democratic Party. But I think before I want to talk about and get your point of view on something that I think has people really outside of the United States alarmed, worried, also inside the United States, which is this I think authoritarianism that we're seeing under the Trump administration. The attacks against civil society, the attacks against the press, against the universities, against the legal system, against judges. And I think the clearest manifestation today that you've been very involved in pushing back against is what we're seeing with ICE, that has made headlines around the world. I can't tell you the number of people that when I talk to in France, they're asking me questions about ICE and I mean, what on earth is happening in the United States with ICE. So I want to ask you a question about that. I mean, when you've been very active on the question of immigration too. Since you've been elected and before that in Congress, how do you sort of interpret why is the administration going to such extreme ends with ICE, right? This force that does not not respecting America, the Constitution of the United States, picking up people on the streets in vans, and on and on. Why is the administration going to such extreme ends with ICE?
Because it can. And I think because in many ways, the last few years, they were really creating the conditions so that they could be doing exactly what they're doing right now. I want to rewind a little, Cole. For 2 years, from 2023 and 2024, every single Republican in every committee in Congress made their priority, whether you were an ENC, which is our energy, commerce is really the committee that we really focus on healthcare, science-based technology, which the name tells you exactly what they're working on, or if you were in natural resources, you were going to be talking about the border. They intentionally spent 2 years vilifying immigrants. Donald Trump went on stage in one of his debates and doubled down on this idea that immigrants were eating dogs, your cats, that we were less than human, that the immigrants and children of immigrants were less than human. And they did that for a while. And I think in many ways, if I'm being blunt with you, Democrats did a terrible, mediocre job in fighting back that narrative, in countering that narrative. And instead of allowing them to beat us on this conversation of border, 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 to have a real conversation about immigration and the contributions of immigrants, because they knew that they can spend enough time for a number of years vilifying immigrants and accusing immigrants for every woe and everything wrong for everyday people in this country, then they can get away with harming them, executing them, arresting them, taking them to third countries, and that as long as it's about immigrants, there wasn't going to be red lines for Democrats, so they can use that to be able to advance their fascism, advance their authoritarian playbook. And it's exactly what you're seeing. Because up until just a few months ago, there were no red lines every time a bill related to immigrants came before the Congress, whether it was the House or Senate. And what do I mean by that? What I'm telling you is like, our leadership wasn't whipping against these bills. The reason, well, you have frontline members who this immigration and border issue has been a big issue for them, so we really can't tell them how to vote. But even now, in 2026, as they're consolidating power by all means and using the premise of coming after immigrants, which you and I both know they're coming after everyone, there are still Democrats that are voting with them. 2.5 weeks ago, 7 Democrats voted to extend funding for DHS.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important for people to understand that, you can say a lot of things about the Republican Party, but they are very strategic. And they know how to use the weakness or lack of leadership that Democrats have had in some cases to meet us in this moment. Because what we know is it was never really about the immigrants. It is about using and scapegoating immigrants as the community that they thought they could marginalize and divide Democrats and divide a nation around. But it's always been about consolidating power by any means. And immigrants was the tool that they would use to do so. And I think that what you're seeing now is, well, if you start using the militarizing of people, these detention centers, building warehouses, interior city attacks, kidnapping, abducting immigrants, it starts normalizing the abuse of military power. Why? So that he can undermine our democratic institutions. And frankly, let's be honest, the end goal is to perpetrate a coup and hold our country hostage so that we no longer have free and fair elections. And how they do that, they use immigrants at the center because Democrats have not, up until this moment, really stepped up to say enough is enough. We all are connected and we are all impacted by what you do to an immigrant. And I think that they're seeing it now. When a mom in Minnesota gets killed, when a nurse of veterans gets executed, and for many of them, for the very first time, folks are saying, whoa, 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 whoa. It's made it to my community. It's made it to my district. Enough is enough.
Right. So a lot of interesting things there. I want to go back to one of the words you used. I want to talk about the immigration question, but you did use the F word, right? You said fascism. Is that, didn't spend necessarily too much time going into semantics, but is that sort of is that the word you think like describes the kind of trajectory we're headed in the United States? Is that what the sort of Trump entourage is that an adequate word to describe them?
It is exactly the word to describe them. And it's interesting, Cole, because when I talk to people that come from all parts of the world, where they have seen and confronted and fought and had to, escape fascism, that's exactly the word that they use. They've seen it.
Yeah.
They've seen the playbook. They've seen how the power consolidation. They see how they've taken over Supreme Courts, in their own countries, right? Their own systems. They've seen how leaders are violating the courts, how they're violating their governing bodies, whether it's a parliament, whether it's a Congress. And so that's exactly what you're seeing here. First of all, you have a Congress that has given up all of its power. including the control where we have of the purse, which is what we call appropriation, and has given it to the executive branch. You have secretaries, leaders, attorney generals coming before Congress, spending more time attacking us, lying, than actually being accountable for how they're managing their agencies. You have agents who were either brought on board last week or in many cases working for the Department of Homeland Security for 10, 12 years, executing people in broad daylight for daring to defend women or other observers that were being harassed, that were being tear gassed. You have children being tear gassed. And when you ask the staff of this administration, the leadership of these agencies, how do you justify this? They either lie or they say, well, you haven't even seen half of it just yet. This attitude that there is nothing that they cannot do. You have a chief of staff to the president who has, I don't know, intentionally or unintentionally gone on record to say, we have a president who believes that there is nothing, that the word no does not exist in his vocabulary. There's nothing he can't do. That's fascism.
Yeah. So moving in, okay, to the question of sort of confronting that, talking about the Democratic Party, you were very critical of sort of how the Democratic Party has been on the immigration question leading up to Trump, so even during Biden and before. I wanted to get I think I might know where you lean on this question, but I think it's an important question to ask because we kind of heard this kind of debate in the United States. I hear it a lot in Europe, actually, on the left when they look at sort of the backlash around the immigration question. What do you make of this idea that, okay, the Democrats have, lost a part of their working class base, moving to the right. And so as a result, we heard this after the Trump victory in 2024. As a result, Democrats need to adopt a sort of more tougher, quote unquote, tougher stance on immigration, because that's going to win them, right, more support, especially among, right, a part of the population they've lost before. What do you make of that argument? I hear it a lot in Europe too.
Yeah. Well, look, one thing that was very clear for me when I got into Congress 3 years ago was that people did not understand the difference between border policy and immigration policy.
Yeah.
And certainly there's so much overlap in that. And I think the very first thing that was very clear to me was that many people, including members of Congress, did not understand the immigration system. So it was just easy to repeat or justify or not know how to respond to a lot of the vilifying of immigrants and saying we just need tougher immigration law. Well, the reality is we already have a pretty broken and tough immigration system. Yeah. There's no reason someone should have to figure out how to loan and borrow $45,000 to be able to cross 3-4 borders to get here. And that means nearly die in the Darien to get here. We don't have actual real legal pathways for refugees who are just days from dying from poverty, whether it's in Ecuador, Colombia, Haiti, or other parts of the world. We didn't have that. Let's just be very clear. So that's border conversations that we need to talk about, how you actually create legal pathways for those that want to come here. But then let's talk about, well, what about the people here? What about the people like my uncle who have been in this country for almost 40 years and put 3 boys through college? From MIT, one of the most renowned universities, right, in this country on technology, to many others. What about him? And the reality is that this country has failed, Democrats and Republicans, to actually do anything around immigration policy to adjust the system since 1986. Well, that's 40 years ago.
Yeah.
40 years ago was the last time under a Republican, Reagan, that people gained amnesty. Because of 40 years ago, my parents are U.S. citizens today and have been now for almost 3 decades. So the reality is that this idea that we just have to get tougher, I think it's a really easy blanket to use. Yes. I think we need to actually recognize the failures of Democrats and Republicans who both have promised to do something about immigration, to actually have said that when we're in power, we're going to fix the system. None of them have, Cole.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, the closest that they ever did, right, that Congress ever did, it failed, I think, in the Senate. But the point is this. you may not actually care about immigrants because somehow you forgot your grandfather, your grandmother came from
Yeah.
Italy, or maybe they came from other parts of the world. I'm not picking on Italy. Love
Yeah.
Italians. I'm just saying, like early 1900s or Ireland, late 1800s. You may not remember this, but let's think about this from a perspective of economy. $96.7 billion is what undocumented, not green card holders, not DACA recipients, but undocumented people paid in federal taxes in the United States in 2024.
Yeah.
If we adjusted if we actually passed an immigration bill that adjusted status for people that had been here, let's just throw a number, here for more than 5 years, more than 10 years, even, you would be able to increase federal revenue by almost twice as much from the taxes they had paid in 2024. That money would directly go to our federal Medicare system, our federal Social Security system, and another 35% would go to local jurisdictions for infrastructure, education, everything else. So even if you don't care about the morality of people being in this country and working their butt off and having children like me who become members of Congress who spend 25 years of public service, think about the financial benefit to actually doing it. So what I would say to you is, I reject this idea that we just have to get tougher on immigration law. We have to get smarter on immigration law. We actually have to do something. And I think for Democrats, this excuse of a filibuster, which, yes, there is a filibuster in the Senate, or that we just, we won, but we're up only by 5 or 6 votes when we have had the House, the Senate, and the White House. I think that Donald Trump has demonstrated to us that those were excuses, because Donald Trump has had less than 5 votes in the House and a couple more yes in the Senate, and has gotten away with murder, literally.
Yeah.
So I just really think that it's important for Democrats to ask themselves, and Cole, you've probably heard me say this before, are you going to continue to operate, even in this precise moment, as the minority party or the opposition party to authoritarianism?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what lessons have we learned in this precise moment, so that when in fact we are in the majority, we do the thing that we keep promising people, and people are tired of promises that have gone empty? Because I think the other piece of that, Cole, if you ask people on doors how excited and how much they trust Democrats, more and more people are rejecting Republicans. It's not automatically translating
Yeah.
into power for Democrats. And we need
Yeah.
to ask ourselves why, and what must we do to change that?
So I want to talk about the Democrats in just 1 second. Just a quick little word for people maybe who don't understand the nuances of American politics. You talk about the filibuster, right? This is in the Senate. You need to have 60 votes effectively to move legislation forward in the Senate, which is this sort of parliamentary tool. So that's a big kind of obstacle that's been cited in the past to sort of block progressive and other forms of legislation. Okay, so let's talk about the Democratic Party, which you mentioned. We're coming into midterms in November. People abroad look at this, they look at the polls. Things are looking pretty good for the Democratic Party, right? And I think maybe beyond that, I think it depends on what kinds of Democrats are being elected, right? There's a whole variety of different kinds of Democrats. Is there a moment? I'll get straight to this question. Is there a moment right now, an opportunity, a window for progressives, sort of in this context that we're in, which is you have a authoritarian president who is increasingly unpopular, even his economic policies, right, are unpopular. The horrors of ICE. Is there an opportunity for right, people on sort of the progressive side of the party to get elected here with this anger, this frustration that we're seeing boiling up against the Democratic Party leadership?
I think more than ever. What I hear around the country is that the constituents and voters and people watching what's happening keep asking, how the heck, I'm going to be careful in case you need to bleep me, how the heck is Donald Trump and the Republicans able to do all this? How is it that in 1 year, this Project 2025 vision that we know was hundreds of pages of attacks on education, on international aid, on citizenship, voting rights, and the list goes on, and immigration, and the list goes on. How is it that they're almost 70% complete with Project 2025
Yeah.
with the votes they have? And how is it that we have Democrats who continue to vote with them? What I'm hearing across the country, and certainly in Illinois, I'm in the state of Illinois, we have 4 open seats for Congress and 1 open seat for U.S. Senate. People are saying, I want to choose my kind of Democrat. And my kind of Democrat, we would probably call more of a working families kind of Democrat. Across the board, I don't have the exact number, Cole. Maybe you can fact check this later, but I would say that at least 1/4 of my colleagues in the Democratic Party in the United States House of Representatives are being primaried by the left. And so what I hear people say, the left is coming. Well, so who is coming for you? And I just said this to someone recently. You mean working class people who want you to fight for them? Working class people that are asking you to do more than a town hall, but actually say something about what's happening in Gaza, the genocide? Or is it people that are asking you how you justify, I'm going to say it, Henry Cuellar in Texas for funding DHS as an appropriator that was just pardoned by Donald Trump? So this is a moment where you're going to see, come November, when we're done with all the election cycles in this country, more progressives like me elected to the United States Congress than you probably have ever seen. And the squad is ready to see more of us join. I think a perfect example, Cole, is what you just saw a week ago with Ana Lilia Mejia.
Yes, who you endorsed. Yeah.
I endorsed her. A number of us endorsed her. I've known her for a number of years. She was outspent 15-1 in that special election. And everyone said to me, especially people in New Jersey, she's great, Delia. I know you obviously you and her have a lot in common, but she's running in a really, really crowded field. And the former member of Congress, he just has the money and the name. And then you saw AIPAC hit him. And we ended up with someone that's going to be to the left of him. And so what you're going to see is more challenges. And, and I'm not encouraging those challenges. I got to be careful with some of my folks out there. But I'm going to say, go prove to your constituents that you are the Democrat that is fighting the hardest. And if you can't prove it, then we'll see the outcome of these elections.
Are there kind of particular names, candidates that you're looking at right now? I know, like you said, it's maybe a little bit delicate because you're right. There's this tradition of not. Right,
I can talk to you about these open seats. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you, I recently just polled in my own district just to see where people were on this U.S. Senate race. We are 30-ish days, if that, to our primary in the state of Illinois for every election, right? And the United States Senate race that we're having here is one where we haven't had a vacancy in almost 2 decades. 39% of my constituents still don't know who they're going to vote for because they don't know who's a progressive in the races. And so you're seeing the Senate candidates all of a sudden say things like abolish ICE. It's like, oh, welcome to the team, right? Or one of them is talking about genocide. I mean, the things that I had not heard even 3 months ago, you are hearing from candidates running in these open seats because people are yearning for a different kind of elected. I'm running unopposed and I'm democracy. Someone could have challenged me. I also know that in the suburban part of my district, which is outside of the city of Chicago, for those that don't know, Chicago, or obviously some of our more geographical things, the parts of my district that had been represented by Republicans up until about 7 years ago, my favorabilities are even higher than there are in the city of Chicago, which also tells you that in many parts of the country where they've never had a Democrat, where they've been Republican, where they are just slowly seeing what Democratic leadership could look like for them, they're choosing a Democrat like me more than your moderate status quo establishment Democrat.
Right. And I want to ask you a question in particular because, and I almost apologize because he's such this kind of like superstar figure now, but I mean, people in France were talking all about him. I went on TV shows here to talk about the New York mayoral race. People here are absolutely fascinated by Zoran Mamdani. When you're sort of on the kind of progressive wing of the Democratic Party, how important is Mamdani and sort of, his ability to govern in New York to your own success? Are you sort of like, watching this closely? Is the success sort of the left in part maybe hinge on sort of Mamdani having a successful sort of term as mayor? How kind of closely are you guys watching this? Or am I blowing this out of proportion? Is this the media basically just being kind of, overly obsessed by these kind of superstar figures? What do you think?
Look, I think it's really important, and I've said this always, it is really important for progressives to be able to demonstrate that we can campaign and govern. It is why for me it's so important that, people see my work every day in my district. My polling favorability is as high as it is because people know that I am calling, I'm calling out Republicans, but I'm also calling out my colleagues on my side to do better. That
Yeah.
I was the very first one to call for the resignation of Kristi Noem, and now every single member of Congress is now following suit. I was the first to call for impeachment, and now we have a strategy to begin that impeachment. I might even meet with the secretary soon because of that. I passed my very first bill in my first term. The congressperson that was in my seat, two people prior, or person prior than me, was in Congress for 23 years and never passed a bill. So the governing part is really
Yeah.
important for us, whether you're a member of Congress or a mayor. I would say to you that, of course, we need him to succeed in the same way that we need the city of Chicago progressive
Yeah.
organizer mayor to succeed. And it was tough for him, especially in his first year and a half as mayor of Chicago. These are two organizers, charismatic, who come from community, who understand working class people, who were elected against all odds in these races, right? So I don't think Zoran happens without Brandon Johnson in Chicago happening. And also, all eyes are on Zoran and saying Zoran learned from some of the challenges that we had in Chicago, especially
Yeah.
because they used immigration and the bus
Yeah.
is coming into the city of Chicago so much as a way to really challenge the leadership of my mayor. Who has been leading, right, and really struggled at the beginning. I also think it's important for people to know they want us to fail. The
Yeah.
corporate Democrats, the establishment, big money, extremely right wing people who don't like that people like us who stand for humanity, whether it's in Palestine or in Chicago, New York, they don't want us to succeed. So we have to work twice as hard. But let me tell you the other piece, Cole, that I think is really important. Zoran didn't just tell people what he was fighting against. He was very clear, and we all knew what he was fighting for.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it is a lesson for anyone who really wants to run and build momentum and have people who never voted before to not just vote, but volunteer and get involved. Give them something to vote for, give them something to
Mm.
believe in, and then also help people understand that in order for us to succeed, you must also engage. And I think that's where Zoran is going to be successful. Is that he's building these committees of people, whether it's around the work he's going to do on housing policy, on healthcare, on childcare, on transportation, to say I can only be successful by the people that will flank me in order to be able to pass this in the city council and withstand the attacks that are coming because great
Mm.
attacks are coming.
Yeah. So a lot of really great points I think you made there that are so important. It's I'm glad you mentioned that aspect of governance, right? When I talk to people here in France, it's like sometimes I feel I can go a little bit nuts by just repeating the same thing, but it's I think it's so essential for progressives and the left to actually demonstrate concrete real victories for people. It's not just these sort of abstract principles, but it's when Mamdani gets elected or when you're elected to Congress or others, that actually you vote for people that are able to make concrete, direct, material changes to improve your lives. It sounds so simple, but I think it's such an important point. I'm glad you mentioned it. Um,
And Cole, can I say one more thing
yeah,
on
yeah,
that?
yeah,
I think for electeds like us that come into this space, that come from the base, we don't have 10 years to be able to do this work. We may be here one term, we might be here two terms, but this idea that you have to wait your turn, that you have to build seniority to be able to file the legislation necessary or to be in the right committee, that is what status quo. And, I think a lot of these folks that want you to base it on seniority, that you have to wait 25 years to be able to pass marquee legislation, want you to believe. And I think that's what Zoran, that is what Brandon, that is certainly what Alex, what Rashida, and so many of us have challenged. I came in to work and be front and center with people to fight for immigration reform, for the dignity of immigrants, but also to really talk about money and politics, to
yeah,
really talk about democracy. And it means that whether I am in the committee of my choice or not, I'm going to use those vehicles to be able to be a leader in it because I don't have 10 years to do this. I need, and our people are
yeah,
tired of waiting. Well, maybe next Congress. And that's what I think you're seeing with a lot of the old guard in Congress right now struggling with. These members just got here 2 years ago. Who do they think they are to be leaders in oversight? The time of wait your turn, whether because you're a woman, a person of color, or you're young, is gone. And we're challenging those systems. And I think to your point, Cole, not only challenging them, we have a pressure to demonstrate we can govern and be successful.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. I think there's another point that you mentioned there. I'm glad you mentioned it. Before sort of the final part, I want to ask maybe a question or two about foreign policy. But staying on, you mentioned, okay, money in politics. And I feel like this is an issue where, when I talk to people in Europe or elsewhere, we can have these debates around like, what kind of strategy should the left take? What are the kind of the key, issues this year? Who are the candidates? Like, I think everyone has these conversations, but you in the United States, you have this separate question that is like this massive obstacle that I think people don't even really wrap their heads around when they're coming from outside the US, which is, you alluded to it, the role of money in politics. The fact that when you're actually defending these progressive ideas, you're taking on, right, massive corporations that are going to finance and support the opposition. Like, I mean, is that almost too much of an insurmountable obstacle today? How do you sort of combat that problem? Is it just basically by running these primaries over and over again and trying to sort of get elected somehow and then, do the work anyways? It's like, it just seems like such an insurmountable, difficult obstacle to take on. How do you guys do it?
It's not insurmountable because we're here, right? And I am about, I'm going to end up going through my primary, right? And then I'll have a general, but hopefully I will get reelected in November. I have a Democratic district, so while I have a Republican opponent, I'm hopeful that I'll earn the support of people and get the percentages that I've gotten in the past. But let me say to you, it is not easy, Cole. The idea, and I resent this, I'm going to be frank with you, that I have to do call time, that I have to call supporters and individuals on a regular basis, that we have to do fundraisers, that I'm asking our folks that support us that maybe, have to make choices. Do I take my family on a nice dinner, this month, or do I donate $100 to Delia? Like, I'm not talking about people with a lot of money, but that, we have to do the work to raise money, whether it's at $10 a month or that one donor that has the capacity to be able to support. But I don't take corporate PAC contributions. I don't take corporate money. And so it means I have to work twice, 3, 4, 5 times as hard, but I have the liberty, because of who I am, because of where I come from, and because I don't take this money, to vote my conscience and vote my district. And it's crazy, Cole, because 65 members of Congress of 535 have taken the no corporate PAC pledge. Some would say only 65. Back in 2018, it was less than 9. So it is changing. It is shifting. There are members of Congress who are running for re-election today who are for the very first time taking a pledge that moving forward they will not take corporate PAC contributions, because I think that a lot of people now are beginning to understand the connection between money and politics and your ability to have Medicare for all, which in the United States is quality healthcare accessible for all regardless of income, right? So people are beginning to make the connections between Donald Trump got a lot of money from these donors, millions of dollars, and they just got contracts to be able to run these private detention centers so they can make more money. Like, people are making those connections. So yes, it's really hard. And I think it's really important for people that care deeply to say, I'm going to contribute that $10 a month, because it allows us to be able to plan accordingly how much we have. It doesn't take away from the fact that I could not, it's hard to compete with $25 million against you, which is what you've seen in some of these elections. But it's doable, and I'll tell you why it's doable. Because if your district knows who you are, if your district sees you working, if your district constituency service staff are doing the work around the clock, then I think that people start seeing, they said that my congresswoman, like, they will attack me in a Democratic primary, right? That she's connected to Donald Trump, but what I see is that she is like the face fighting Donald Trump. That mailer or those 35 mailers got to be a lie. When people can counter that, I think you're able to show that it's doable. But Cole, I'm going to tell you, and what I've said to our leadership, Of course, immigration, healthcare, education, passing a Green New Deal, which is really prioritizing environment, clean air and water, have to be, and passing expanded voting rights have to be top priorities for Democrats when we're in the majority. But Cole, let me be honest with you. None of that will fully pass to the extent it's necessary until we actually codify the ending of what we call in the United States Citizens United.
Yeah.
Closing the loopholes, limiting how much money people can spend on campaigns, and ending super PACs.
Right.
That should be the thing that Democrats show that we're fighting for, and we need more people talking about it.
Right. So that's another huge topic. Unfortunately, we don't have all the time to go in depth to all these topics. I want to end with just a couple of questions here, moving to foreign policy, to sort of the final section of our conversation. So one of the interesting things, among sort of many, I think, of your qualities in Congress is that, so you've been critical not just of, right, the Russian sort of war of aggression against Ukraine, this brutal war that continuing today, but also, right, of the horrors in Gaza. Use the word genocide to describe the humanitarian catastrophe that we're seeing in Gaza. Do you think there really is a sort of movement among Democrats, or at least part of the Democratic Party, to kind of move away and be a little bit more critical of the United States relationship with Israel? This is something that, right, internationally is getting a lot of attention. People are saying, well, look, actually, there's maybe a shift among young people in the United States, among some Democrats who are kind of revisiting kind of the historic view of American foreign policy vis-a-vis Israel. Do you think is a real shift underway, or is it sort of like, I don't know, a handful of figures like yourself, maybe some young people? How real is this?
I think it's very real, Cole. And if you would have asked me this question 16 months ago, I would have said, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to take because, again, you have groups, foreign lobbies, and I'll say it in the United States, it's AIPAC, who is playing in Democratic primaries and also taking most of their money from Republicans. But it's shifting, and I'll tell you why. Because when I think about the number of my colleagues who received $2 million from AIPAC to win their elections, publicly reject AIPAC support this time around, there's a major shift when their primary donor, or what AIPAC would say, we bought that seat, so it's our seat, starts seeing a rejection from that congressperson. I think the other piece that I would say to you is that I think it's important is that what we have been doing here in Congress, and certainly a number of us would say I'm on the most left, is really helping people understand that everything that's happening is really connected. Yeah. Whether it's the cuts to services Americans rely on, the mass deportations, attack on human rights defenders, the invasion of Venezuela, and the death and displacement of Palestinians. So we are really pushing for people to understand that authoritarians like Trump, Putin, Netanyahu, Bukele, they want our resources, they want our land, they want our freedoms. And it's not just an issue of what's happening 1,000 miles away, it's impacting everyday people, and you can't unsee what is happening in Gaza. And the way that, whether it's Bibi Netanyahu or Donald Trump, they are robbing people of their resources in Gaza and committing a genocide for the sense of profit and this unconditional support of Israel that has been the standard in this country and in Congress for so long, and that constituents around the country are saying enough is enough. I'll give you a quick example. I am the lead sponsor of a bill called Block the Bombs. It is a bill that not only provides congressional oversight, but blocks the sending of particular offensive weapons to Israel that would not be allowed to be sent without congressional oversight and bills that would come subsequent to that. People said to me, Delia, you're absolutely crazy. How could you do that? AIPAC is going to come for you. They're going to challenge your race. No one will sign on to it other than the squad. 61 members of Congress have signed on as co-sponsors. 4 of them got elected with more than $2 million from AIPAC. So it is shifting. Approval rates for AIPAC, which is the main super lobby for them again, in Congress, their approval rates in my district is 9% of my district approves AIPAC. 80% of my district now knows who AIPAC is. It is significantly shifting because I think more and more people are understanding that foreign policy and state by state or city by city is interconnected, and they're tired of this idea of unconditional support to what they believe is a dictatorship, right? Or a war criminal, whether it's Bibi Netanyahu or Donald Trump. And
Right.
it's hopeful. I'm going to be doing a number of rounds on the floor over the next few weeks around what's happening also in the West Bank.
Great. Um, Maybe a time for just a final quick question, which I know is, it's maybe a big topic, but I think it is important to ask. It's my, if you'll forgive me, sort of the more European side, because I'm here and people are talking about it in Europe. Donald Trump basically threatening to sort of tear up the transatlantic alliance, right? This has been going back to the Second World War. There's the threats to annex Greenland, could be something else in just a few days. Like when progressive Democrats, if Democrats, right, win the majority, if let's say in an ideal world, progressive Democrats are in power in the United States, okay, in a handful of years, like, is that like, are those relationships worth repairing? Is it important, right? I guess it's kind of, I feel surreal to be asking this question. Is the transatlantic alliance, right, something that the left in the United States thinks is important, continuing to have this partnership with Europe?
Absolutely, Cole. And the fact that you even have to ask the question, right, really speaks to the moment that we're living in this country. I also have to say to you that it's going to probably take a while for us to restore some of these relationships.
Yeah.
That what Donald Trump is doing, what the State Department is doing, is creating, in some cases, some real permanent damage to some of these relationships, and it's really devastating to watch and see. And we kind of knew this was going to happen when you saw that one of his first executive orders was to absolutely defund USAID around the world, and talk about Greenland. I mean, this was part of what he talked about even in
Yeah.
his inauguration, right? And the way that he has attempted to degrade Canada, and every single country, whether it's Norway, Switzerland, and the list goes on. So no, I really think that it is important for us to restore. It's going to take a while for us to restore, and this idea of a American ideology. Oh well, okay, change of government, get over it, let's move
Yeah.
on. We're
Yeah.
going to have some real reckoning.
Yeah.
What restoring relationship reparations look like all over the
Yeah.
world. And I'll tell you as we wrap up, the other piece of that I think is important to talk about is the way that this country has looked at the Western Hemisphere, and particularly Latin America. And I think that it's important for us to think about a bill that I'm just co-leading now. It's called the Good Neighbor Act, which is a bill that really calls the United States to forge a different path for our country's relationship with Latin America and the Caribbean. And I think that it has to shift because we've treated them as our backyard, as the place to play and profit from, and then ask ourselves why we see the immigration phenomenon, forced
Yeah.
migration phenomenon that you see. And so I think it's going to be important for us to, one, understand that we have to end the Monroe Doctrine that has justified a paternalistic, violent, damaging approach to relations with our neighbors in Latin America and Caribbean, and that we recognize our interconnectedness. And I think to me that interconnectedness is whether it's Salvador, Venezuela, Colombia, Haiti, or Europe, or Africa. We have a lot of work to do, Cohen. And as we wrap up, let me just say this to you. I said this to my husband this morning. It has been one hell of a year and 2 months. But I see hope, especially in the people in this country who had never spoken up in the way that they are, either building mutual aid, building rapid response teams, whether it's for children whose parents have been deported, or for people who are, or young trans children who are afraid of leaving their home because of what this president is doing. The number of people that are protesting, every time that he talks about coming after people for protesting on social media, you still see thousands of people hitting the streets in negative 35-degree temperature. Or the number of people that are stepping up to run who had never ran before, and our ability to call out these super PACs and lobbyists that are trying to buy elections, and really a global approach in the way that we lead, and a recognition of the harm that the United States has caused all over the world, that gives me hope that when we turn the page,
Yeah.
that perhaps we won't turn the page to who we were in 2024, but we actually move forward to be a country that really understands what global partnership could look like, and one that doesn't have to be I'm in the front and the superpower, but one that understands that we're hand in hand, side by side, working with others. I think we can get there. Out of the fascism you see, out of the attacks you see, out of this playbook, I think Democrats, working class people, and others are realizing we can have something different, and we're going to demand it until we get it.
Great. It seems like an excellent note to end on. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Congresswoman Ramirez. It was really a pleasure just talking to you and hearing your perspective on these issues. So thanks so much for taking the time again.
Appreciate you, Cole. Take care.
Thank you for listening to What Do We Want? Conversations with the International Left. The show is produced by Troy Miller. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow me on Instagram, cole.stangler. We have a number of great guests lined up over the coming weeks. Politicians, activists from France, Spain, Mexico, and beyond. So please stay tuned, and you'll be hearing more from me in the coming weeks.